I think whether to use a one-shot color camera or a monochrome camera with various color filters is in many ways a personal choice and somewhat dictated by the environment in which one is shooting. However, regardless of personal choices, one advantage that shooting astrophotography with a monochrome camera will always have is that it's more efficient. Whether shooting in narrowband, RGB, or LRGB, monochrome cameras can always gather more information per unit of time. However, I've noticed that many persons nonetheless remain hesitant to get into monochrome imaging due to some, I'm going to call them myths. Myths involving cost, myths involving difficulty, and myths involving risk. Today, let's talk about the myths related to going mono. Let's begin by addressing the myth of cost. Well, in this case, it's not exactly a myth. Unfortunately, monochrome astro cameras are going to cost a bit more. The main reason is because monochrome cameras will lack a bare matrix or bare color filter. You see, a color camera, known in astrophotography as a one-shot color camera or OSC, is actually a camera with a monochrome sensor. In fact, all camera sensors are monochrome. And over the sensor is a device, a layer called a bare filter or bare matrix. That's bare spelled B-A-Y-E-R. And this bare filter is made of millions of tiny, almost single-cell size filters in red, green, and blue. And the one-shot color camera's monochrome sensor captures light through these filters in 3 channels, red, green, and blue, and those 3 channels are recombined within the camera to produce a color image. The bare filter is an ingenious filter that makes possible the modern color camera, and almost all modern cameras are color. Most everybody wants to look at images in color, the same way that our eyes see. And the bare filter is attached directly to the sensor, and the sensors are then installed in whatever make and model of camera that you get. Since the cost of something is based in part by how much it is mass-produced, it is cheaper for camera makers, including makers of astrophotography cameras, to buy sensors that have already been fitted with bare filters. So, color cameras, including one-shot color cameras used in astrophotography, are cheaper to build. And, as strange as it might sound, when you buy a monochrome camera, you're actually paying more for less. You're paying extra for a sensor that did not have a bare filter attached in manufacturing. So, on average, a monochrome camera is going to cost more, about 20 to 30% more. Not a bank-breaking amount of money, but a substantial amount of money. On the other hand, personally, the way I look at this is a camera is pretty much a one-time expense. I'm not the kind of person that's going to run out and buy the next camera and the next camera just because a manufacturer came out with a small innovation. So for me, a one-time expense for a camera that is going to be more efficient and which I'm going to use for years and years is worth it. But yes, a monochrome camera is going to cost a bit more. It's just not a bank-breaking amount more. And the reason I brought this up is I've gotten some posts recently from some persons saying that it costs anywhere from 50 to 100% more for a monochrome camera, and it doesn't. If you look at the prices, it's usually around 20 to 30% more. A substantial amount, but not bank-breaking. Now, if you're going to shoot with mono and you plan to make color images, you're going to need filters. You're going to need RGB, LRGB, or narrowband filters, depending on where you're shooting and what your shooting goals are. And the reality is, it is easy to spend more on filters than the cost of a camera, but you don't have to. For example, here in Canada, a complete set of ZWO LRGB filters costs just about $250. Not dirt cheap, but also for something that you're going to use for years and years and which give excellent performance, to me it's worth it. But this is another expense you have to factor into the initial cost of going monochrome. And if you want to shoot in narrowband, well, narrowband filters tend to cost a bit more. You can easily spend as much as $1,000 per filter, though in my case I just use Antlia 7nm filters and I get excellent results from them, and they cost $215 Canadian each and probably works out to about $175 USD. Now you might be thinking, well, if you put the cost of LRGB filters and narrowband filters together, it's about $1,000. That's the cost of a camera, and that is true. But the fact is, these filters allow you to do things with a monochrome astrophotography camera that you simply cannot do with an OSC. For one, you can capture light in very specific frequencies, allowing you to mix color and information in ways that are very precise and detailed. The filters can provide clues to what sort of information you're looking at, what type of material emitted that light far out in space. You can get very creative with color palettes since you're working with discrete monochrome channels, and you can assign whatever colors you want to those channels. And you can use other filters for very specific tasks, such as searching for nitrogen emissions in space. It should be noted, by the way, that you don't have to buy all these filters. You can just buy the filters that you want to shoot. If you decide that you only want to shoot in basic narrowband, then you would only need your HA, S2, and O3 filters. Or, if you're shooting beneath the dark sky, you can choose to shoot in LRGB, which offers a natural color palette that is more varied and richer than what one finds in narrowband. But the single most compelling reason, in my mind, for using a monochrome camera is they offer a significant advantage in terms of efficiency when gathering light. A monochrome camera sensor, unrestricted by a bare filter, can capture light up to a full f-stop faster. By determining just what your shooting conditions and goals are, you can purchase just the filters you need, thereby cutting down your expense significantly. In addition, you're going to need a filter wheel to hold and use all those filters. And I bought my filter wheel, I think it was on sale, it was a Christmas special, I got it for $400, so another significant expense. Not bank-breaking, but yes, it does cost more to get into monochrome astrophotography. However, with a one-shot color camera, you should still also be using filters. At the minimum, you're going to need a single filter drawer and a UV IR cut filter, which is going to improve the quality and clarity of your images, and that will cost about $100. If you live in an area that suffers light pollution, you're going to want a dual band or a tri-band filter, which is going to significantly take away from the already efficiency-challenged color camera sensor, but with the advantage of being able to penetrate light pollution much the same way narrowband filters do for monochrome cameras. And that's also going to cost you anywhere from $300 to $600. So I'll run a cost comparison with my equipment. I have a Player One Aries M, that's $1,000, a Player One 36mm Phoenix filter wheel, that's $300, and decent but not bank-breaking light filters running anywhere from $215 to $650. I'm taking these prices off an American site, so that's all in USD, and that runs from $1,515 to $1,950 US dollars. On the other hand, if I were to use the Player One Aries M color camera, that would be $800, $112 for a filter drawer, and if you live in an area of light pollution, about $500 for a decent dual band filter. In total, about $1,400 USD. Or, if I was shooting in an area of dark skies and just needed a UV IR cut filter, about $100. So the total cost to go into one-shot color gear would be anywhere from $1,000 to $1,400, depending on whether or not I wanted to just go with UV IR cut filter, which again would need dark skies. Otherwise, I would need a more expensive dual or tri-band filter. So the total setup cost difference is between 25 and 50%. The biggest factor affecting cost differences will be which filters you decide to go with. So while the cost difference for getting into mono as opposed to a one-shot color camera is significant, it's nowhere near the 2 to 3 times more expensive that some misclaim. And if you're frugal and buy things on sale, and don't fall into the trap of thinking that the most expensive thing is the best thing, that's a common gimmick in the entire photography world, then you can save a lot of money and still get excellent results. Like I've pointed out in other videos, my own astrophotography is made with very reasonably priced gear, most of which I bought on sale. Let's consider the next myth, that it's more difficult to develop monochrome images. This myth, I can tell you categorically, is untrue. There are initially a few more steps to get used to doing, but once you understand them, you can run through them without giving it a second thought. It's all pretty well automated these days. So when you shoot images through a monochrome camera, you're going to usually get 3 or 4 channels worth of information. I almost always shoot LRGB, so I get luminance, red, green, and blue channels. The first thing I always do is inspect and call my subs, keeping only the best of the best. Using a software package called View, I give the subs a quick visual inspection, mostly watching for cloud cover to be blocking stars, and I just get rid of anything that's obviously defective. Sometimes, given that I live way out in the Canadian backwoods, I'll have things happen that the calling software has no idea what it's looking at, which requires me to do a manual inspection. Such as one night I had an owl land on the side of the observatory and partially obscured the view of the telescope. And I haven't yet been able to talk the creators of subframe calling software, such as the subframe selector, into making an owl recognition update. And that's why I have to do manual inspections with View, because automated calling software just isn't going to know what to make of an owl. But using View, I can quickly and easily visually inspect all the subs. Even if I end up with 1,000 in the morning, it only takes a few minutes to do a visual inspection and get rid of any of the obviously flawed subs. Then I run the visually called images through PixInsight's subframe selector, and I have other videos on how to use that and the formula that I use for calling subs with it. You're welcome to take a look at that, I'll link them here. And it's when I reach the subframe selector part of the culling process that things become just slightly more complicated with mono. You see, I can't just have the subframe selector compare all of the information, because the thing shot on the red channel will be very different from the thing shot on the green channel, the blue channel, and all of that is going to look very poor compared to the luminance channel, which captures an amazing amount of information in any given unit of time. So to make sure the subframe selector is comparing apples to apples, I have it first assess only the luminance subs, and then have it assess only the red subs, then the green subs, and then the blue subs. Then we move on to stacking. Now, if you use PixInsight's weighted batch preprocessor, stacking monochrome images is very quick and simple. It doesn't matter whether you shot RGB, LRGB, or some form of narrowband. As long as you've told your software to label each one of those subs according to its filter, the weighted batch preprocessor will automatically sort all of the subs into their correct channel. Now, to do a good stacking job, you're going to need your flat calibration frames. And when you shoot your morning flats, you need to shoot flats through whichever filters you use during the night. So, since I shoot in LRGB, when I shoot my morning flats, I shoot luminance flats and then R, G, and B flats respectively. And if you're using software like Nina's extremely convenient Flat Wizard, which will automatically label those flats, and you're using the weighted batch preprocessor in PixInsight, the flats will automatically be sorted into categories to be applied to the respective color channels. It's probably similar in other stackers, but it has been ages since I've used other stackers, so I couldn't walk you through the exact process. The weighted batch preprocessor is really good, and it's one of the features of PixInsight that I really like. When stacking is done, you're going to end up with a master from each channel. So in my case, since I'm shooting in LRG and B, I end up with a luminance master and a red, green, and blue master. In basic developing, the red, green, and blue masters are combined in the channel combination tool to make a full color RGB image, and the luminance master is added to that to add its additional light and fine detail information. And from that point, developing proceeds with the image pretty much how you would develop a one-shot color image. Always bear in mind, a one-shot color image is an image taken off a monochrome camera sensor, just with built-in RGB filters. It is fundamentally the same kind of information. And once you get past the basic monochrome developing, where the information is all combined together to make that very sharp full-color image, the various kinds of images, one-shot color, RGB, LRGB, and narrowband, are all pretty much developed in the same way from there. Ultimately, that might sound like a lot, but that initial basic developing is just a few steps. One gets used to it. To me, the most tedious step is having to use the subframe selector to inspect each separate channel's information. But it's not a big deal, and you get used to it. After a few sessions, I was just doing this by rote without even thinking about it. I had the whole process memorized, easy as learning the ABCs. And after that, monochrome images are developed just like color images, so it's just not that difficult. Essentially what I'm saying is, don't let the myth that it's very complicated to develop monochrome information into an image, don't let that deter you. It really isn't. It's just a myth. If you want to see specifically how it's done, look at my astrophotography development playlist. I'll link that here. The first video on that playlist covers how to call the information, and the second video covers how to stack and combine it and do the basic developing. Finally, let's take a look at the risks, or more appropriately perhaps, challenges that are supposed to be associated with shooting in monochrome. There are two that I see pop up in online discussions a lot. One is it's said that it takes longer to shoot in mono, and the other is that if the weather should become cloudy during the night, you could end up with only partial information and not be able to complete your image. Let's address the assertion that it takes longer to shoot in mono first, because that one's very easy to clear up. So, does it take longer to shoot in mono? I can answer that in 3 words. It does not. In fact, it takes less time. As I covered in my previous video, LRGB versus RGB and OSC, monochrome cameras are a full f-stop more efficient than color cameras, meaning they gather information, or light, twice as fast. At least if you're shooting through a luminance filter, where all visible light is allowed to make contact with the camera sensor. And if you are shooting the full color range plus a luminance filter, or LRGB, it's easy to derive a 50% or better efficiency margin. Even if you are just shooting RGB or with narrowband filters, the monochrome camera will still have an efficiency edge over a one-shot color camera, or OSC, because the light passing through those filters doesn't also have to pass through a bare layer. Since I shoot LRGB at a 50-50 luminance to RGB ratio, thereby deriving an efficiency benefit in my light gathering of 50%, I can gather as much detail information as would take an OSC camera 6 hours in just 4 hours. There's a little bit more to the math than that. I'll need to focus a couple additional times over a 2-hour period. than I would have to with a one-shot color camera, which would eat up in total about 5 additional minutes. So you could say that I'm actually getting a 47 to 48% efficiency benefit, but that's still substantial. And in the end, it means that it takes significantly less time to image an object with a monochrome camera than one would require with an OSC. Now let's address that assertion that if the weather should become cloudy, you could end up with only partial information. Imagine that you have a monochrome camera and you're shooting LRGB like I do. In my case, I spend 60 minutes on the luminance filter, then 20 minutes on the red, 20 minutes on the green, and 20 minutes on the blue filters, and then the sequence repeats back to luminance, then red, green, and blue. So imagine I'm imaging a target one night and clouds roll through. It's nearly the middle of summer and the nights are very short. In fact, I only get 6 hours of sufficient darkness. Scattered clouds rolled through during the night and interfered with my last 2 hours of RGB imaging, so I ended up with 3 hours of luminance and only 1 hour of RGB information. That might sound off balance and give the impression I cannot create an image out of that. It's not true though. You see, it's much faster to gather color information than detail. It's the fine detail, the high frequency information that takes a long time to collect. So if I have 3 hours of luminance information, I'm good. I can easily enhance the color information through processes such as saturation and get enough color out of that information to make a good image. Granted, the image would be better if I had some more RGB to add to it, but still, I can make a good image with what I have. But let's say an even worse case situation rolls along. Let's say it's partly cloudy through the night, every now and then some clouds roll through and block my image, and through sheer chance, the clouds mostly block the DSO while I'm shooting the blue channel. So in the morning, I end up with about 3 hours of luminance, and most of 3 hours worth of red and green information, but less than an hour of blue information. This also does not pose a huge problem for the same reasons that I just described. It does not take long to gather low-frequency information such as color, and low-frequency information does not have to be precise like high-frequency information. So I can easily enhance just the blue channel with tools such as saturation and levels, thereby balancing the presentation of color within the image. And as before, it would of course be better had I been able to get balanced RGB, but it's just not that big a deal. It's really quite simple to balance the color information. The image you are seeing right now is the Wizard Nebula, wherein exactly that scenario happened to me. I was able to enhance the blue and go ahead and finish the image, and then a few days later, when I had another good dark night, I shot the Tulip Nebula again. It's very dim anyway, and I had planned to put in more integration time on it, but I just set the sequencer to record double the blue information that I would usually record, which made up for the lack of blue from the previous partly cloudy night. And that was it. Problem solved. So, while it is certainly theoretically possible for a partly cloudy night to cause you to get an imbalance of color information, the reality is that it's easily compensated for and easy to make up for later. And in either case, since shooting with a monochrome camera is so much more efficient, even if you're having to do a little makeup shooting to gather some additional color information, you're still coming out ahead in terms of the amount of information gathered over time with a monochrome camera. So, to be very honest, I find that worries about getting imbalanced color information, they're pretty much unfounded. If you end up with color imbalance, it's easy enough to compensate for in developing and still resolve a good image. And if you still feel that you need to get more information through a particular filter, you can just designate a portion of the next night that you're going to shoot to do a little catch-up imaging. Because monochrome is always more efficient, you're still coming out ahead as compared to using a one-shot color camera. So please don't interpret this video as one of those mono is better than color kind of videos. It's not meant to be. I'm just providing information for you to consider if you've been thinking about making the jump from color to mono, but have been hesitating due to some of those myths that I mentioned. The myths are at best half-truths. To summarize, when you factor in the cost of getting a filter drawer and filters for a one-shot color camera, getting into mono will cost 25 to 50% more depending on what filters you purchase. And stretched across, say, 5 to 10 years of using a particular camera, which I would hope you would use a camera for that long anyway, that expense is marginal. And it really, truly isn't that much more difficult to develop a mono image than a color image. There are just a few additional steps to balance and combine the color channels. And in the end, a monochrome camera is always going to be more efficient. You're always going to come out with more information over time with a monochrome camera. And the risk of shooting imbalanced color due to something like partly cloudy skies is negligible. I mean, it's going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen, but it's easily compensated for. So, if those myths are holding you back from making the leap to mono, my advice is, don't let them. I really, genuinely think it's worth it. Now, the weather gods have so far favored me with 2 nights of crystal clear, moonless conditions, and There's supposed to be another such night tonight. So I'm going to get back to my present project, a deep exposure of LDN 673. This far north, the nights are very short. I only get about 6 hours to shoot per night. And it's a dim target, but I'm hoping to be able to finish the exposure tonight. And with any luck, I'll have the image posted on the Sky Story Astro bin within a day or two. So it's time for me to head out, open up the observatory, and get it prepped for the evening. And I hope you too are having wonderful clear skies so that you also can get out there and shoot the sky.